Welcome to the Chamber of the Scribe podcast, the educational and encouragement epicenter for embracing the calling, purpose, and function of the present-day prophetic scribe and artisan, with your host, Theresa Harvard Johnson.
Welcome home, prophetic scribes. Grab a cup of coffee, grab a cup of tea, take hold of a friend, sit back and relax, because today I'm going to be sharing a part of my writing journey with you. We're going to talk about prophetic writing. I'm going to share with you how God used prophetic writing to guide my life. And I'm going to be very transparent in this conversation and open about where I've been and where I'm going. And I hope that it's an opportunity for you to reflect on your life as well, and to begin to look at how the Lord uses writing in your life from the prophetic perspective and just from an everyday perspective. I hope we can laugh a little bit together today, cry a little, and more than anything, I pray that you will be at peace with your process, at peace with the things that you write about, and at peace with knowing that God uses the gifts that He's given us to help us heal and move forward in the things that He has ordained for us to do. I was born a scribe. I talked about this a little bit in episode 14 when we discussed 6 ways God calls the prophetic scribe into ministry. So if you haven't listened to that, I encourage you to do so, because I believe you may find yourself in one of those areas, or maybe even more than one of those areas. I also mentioned that I felt as if I was born a scribe. And I believe this about myself for many reasons. And I know that, when you're looking at your own gifting, you have reasons why you believe God called you. But I believe I've always been meant to be a prophetic writer, which is a type of scribe. And the Lord has always used the weight of my pen to help me heal. I can remember feeling, and still do, but I can remember feeling this overwhelming, unexplainable pull. This was before I knew the Lord, to cry, to weep, to scream, to shout, to laugh through my ink. Anyone who knew me growing up, they'll tell you every time we saw Theresa, that girl, she had a pen or a pencil and some kind of notebook in her hand. She was always writing. Those are the kinds of things that I would say people remember the most about me if they were around me or they knew me well. That's true from being a little girl, a school-age girl, all the way up to even now. There's nowhere I go and nothing that I do that I don't have pen and paper in hand. It's not enough for me to just type on my phone. I have to have that pen to paper connection. The writing instrument must be in my hand. If you can understand this, I want you to give a shout out today, because that's where many of us are. And to me, it's confirmation that God has called me. It's confirmation that the pen is not separate from who I am. I was activated into my calling in elementary school. And what I mean by this is that writing came alive for me as a little girl. I had this teacher who would read poetry from the Harlem Renaissance movement every single morning in homeroom. And I would be stirred in my soul. I would get so excited because she would read the poetry from a demonstrative perspective, as if a person was becoming the poem. Sometimes she dressed like one of the poets or act like one of the poets. And I'm telling you, there's something about that went all through me. And I started reading everything I could get my hands on. I love to read, and I started reading at a very early age. But I tell you, my teacher took notice of that as well. And if you're a teacher, never, 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 ever discount the impact that you have or can have in the life of a child in the classroom. Some of you may not know this, but the only joy and hope some children get every day is seeing your face when they come in the morning time. Back then, I didn't have a voice when I was a 6 and 7 year old girl. I don't think I regained my voice until I was in my late 30s. And so I went a long time without my voice. And what I am saying to you is that I really felt as if no one listened to me. I would tell people what was going on. No one acted. There was no one to rescue me in my life. I was secondary to everything. Everything came first before me. And I was a child, and I just never felt like I was important. I remember wanting to go to the library sometimes because I love the library. I would ask to be dropped off early in the morning. I'm talking 8, 9 years old, asking when my parents had finally moved into a house instead of the projects. We were renting a house. And so, I think I was about 10. Let me push that up. And I can still remember begging to be dropped off at the library, in the city where I lived. And it was called Washington Library in a little city called Macon, Georgia. And I would be in that library from the time it opened to the time it closed at night. I would make my own peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And I would do this so often. But this was the horrible part about it, was people would forget that I was there. And I would have to hitchhike my way home at night. A little girl, 10 years old, hitching a ride to the other side of town because I was forgotten. No one picked me up. But one thing that happened in those summers when I would do that was the librarians knew me. The librarians got to a point where they would have certain books ready and waiting for me when I walked in because they knew that I loved poetry. I read so many books. Oh my goodness. And I also remember being redirected. I would be caught in the adult section, and the librarians would run me back down to the children's section. I know a lot of that has changed today, but we use that Dewey Decimal System to go in and find our books. And I had mastered that. And I read so much. And by the time I was in third or fourth grade, I was already reading outside of my school age group, way outside of my school age group. So I just want to share that, to just share how much of a scribe that I was, how innate those things were to me when I was a kid. Writing and reading were my escape. I was learning anything I wanted to learn about. I learned from books. And I'll go as far as to say, I learned that I wasn't being treated right at home, and I learned that I was being neglected based on books that I read and books that had things about children in it. And so I began to realize just how much trouble I was in. But as a kid, you don't often think about telling people because you don't know what to do. You're just trying to survive and you're just trying to live. So, as my teacher would meet us with the poetry in the morning, I was also that kid that would take those poetry books and copy the poems out over and over again because I wanted to grasp the flow. I wanted to feel the emotion of it. And I'm a little kid and I'm loving this. And I felt like those poems were giving me a voice. I felt like those poems could speak for me. And I began to mimic the voice of the poets that I was reading. So I want to give you some insight on my trouble. I know that it's good sometimes to hear a person's testimony to see what makes a person who they are. But I grew up in a home with a mother who was severely mentally ill, and she suffered from schizophrenia. and manic depression. Those were the diagnoses that I understood were giving her at that time. I didn't know that when I was going through my trauma with her, but it's something that I would come to understand years later as I got older. My mother suffered. She would cry all the time. I would find her in corners, balled up in knots, holding her knees to her chest, just rocking and crying. This was often. I would find her in the pantry like that. In the corner between the refrigerator and the stove. I mean, and it would just confuse me because I was just a little girl and I was like, what's wrong with mama? And I would be alone with her a lot. And I remember one day I was coming home from school and I was running like I did all the time. I would hop out of the classroom, run down the hill with my friends, and we'd race through the projects where I lived. And we'd come down the street the same way every day. And generally, I would go straight to my house. But this day, there were police blocking my house. The neighbors were all on the street. An ambulance was there at the house. I saw the stretcher being pulled down. I saw one of my neighbors looking at me, watching me. But then I just got tunnel vision because I saw my mother rolling on the ground with her slip on, just a slip. And she was rolling in the dirt and in the grass. And I threw my Bugs Bunny satchel on the ground and I ran to her. And I remember, like, what is going on? What is happening? And everybody's staring at me. They're staring at mama. And I ran up to her and I pulled the slip down because I didn't want anyone to see her underwear. And right when I did that, one of the neighbors snatched me and she said, baby, it's going to be all right. You can stay with me until somebody gets home. And I watched as they began to put my mother there on that gurney. And I snatched away from her and I got back to my mom. And my mom turned her head away from me and she said, I don't want my baby to see me like this. And she just started hollering and screaming. And I just remember looking in shock. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything. And I never heard a person speak of it again. And I don't believe I wrote about it, but I remember it doing something to me on the inside. I became so afraid, a level of fear that I don't think I had felt up until that point. And I mentioned to you that my household was very toxic anyway. There was a lot of domestic abuse, a lot of domestic violence, a lot of ungodly things taking place, things that I witnessed with my other siblings. And so this was the height of that trauma. And back then, the medication or the shock treatments left my mama in a catatonic state. She slept all day. She slept all night. She was committed to mental hospitals so often that I actually lost count. We were evicted all the time. And my father had abandoned us. And so I was used to being put out of the house and sitting in the rain, all of your belongings saturated, everything thrown away. Nobody coming to check, nobody to rescue. And I didn't realize all this time that I was turning into someone that would need a lot of help later on, a lot of help to come out and come back alive. And so this is the place my pen found itself. And I say my pen because no one was here. And I was like, can somebody help me? Daddy, I would call him and say, Daddy, can you come get me? And different things. And there's a lot of in between stuff. Nobody ever came. No one ever came for me. And so I processed that through writing. And when my mom would come home from the hospital after we would get back into a place, and I guess that was my dad who paid the bills and would catch things up, I would get myself ready for school. I would fix my own food. I would comb my own hair. I would dress myself, wash my own clothes in the bathtub with soap because we didn't have a working washing machine and I was too small to push our clothes to the laundromat. It was too far away. I cleaned my mama. I fed her. I dressed her. I gave her her meds. And when she wasn't on her meds, it was a living hell. It was a living hell. She tormented me, just day in and day out. I lived in fear. She was always screaming, fussing, fighting, twisted religious rants. And I'm just giving you a backdrop because I want to show you. I'm going to share some writing with you in a little bit. And I want to show you that I believe God gave me this gift before the foundations of the world. And even though I did not know him personally, he was meeting me in that writing in my dark places, causing me to know how to process and putting big words beyond my years into those pages and giving me a way of processing what was happening in my heart, even though I couldn't fully explain it. I wasn't a kid that went around telling people what happened, what was going on in my life. I mean, I was embarrassed enough because the school bus would see our stuff in the yard. The children would be whispering behind my back. They'd laugh at how I was dressed and how I was looking, but I was putting myself together without any adult help. The religious aspects of my mother's life was so severe that she was painting crosses on every window in the house to ward out the evil spirits. She was floating pictures and pitchers of water saying that this would keep us safe and putting little crosses on it and things like that. She was wearing giant crosses around her neck and carrying the Bible with her with our pictures in it and saying these weird things that she would say. And there I was having to walk the streets with her while she ranted because that was my mom. And wherever she went, if she wanted to walk for 3 hours, there I was behind her as she walked and preached in the neighborhood and with the twistedness of her preaching, while also talking about conspiracy theories and having people trying to kill her. So all of this was mixed up. And there I was, this little girl following behind her wherever she went, hungry, not having a choice. I could see people looking at me like that po child, how they do in the hood. And, they're just like, look at that po child. Oh, that's Miss such and such and such. And that's her child. She don't hurt nobody. And that little girl always with her. But no one helped. No one helped. And, one of the poems I wrote came from that place because the humiliation was so intense. The shame was so intense because there I was being emotionally abused, physically abused, being tormented. I would hide from my mother when she went into her rants. And one day I closed myself in a closet so she couldn't get me and beat me. And there I was in that closet, and she propped a chair up to the door and locked me in that closet, and I could not get out for a whole day. And there I was in that closet, no bathroom. It was hot, no one to come. And then she would rant and rave the whole time, saying God needs to save my soul and going through all of this stuff. Said children who talk back to their parents, their days are short and you're not going to live that long. So I'm hearing all of these things and I'm hating God. And I'm wondering, why am I alive? And why am I here? And who would even put a child through this? I mean, I'm thinking of suicide and thinking of killing myself. And I'm only 10, 11 years old. but this is where I was. And then when that wasn't happening, my mom would visit all of these churches or these different churches in the area, and this one church in particular. And there we were in the church as the people try to pray for her and they ignore the little girl who's with her, that's watching all of the antics, all of the casting out, all of this stuff, just to go home and have to live through it all again. But I remember that night that she locked me in the closet. That day she locked me in the closet. It was late that night and the house was really quiet. I figured she fell asleep because she was exhausted. She would go long periods of time without sleeping. And there she was, removing the chair and letting me out of the closet. And all I could do was hope we had running water so I could go in and bathe and clean myself up from having been in there and not able to get into a bathroom. I know some of this sounds a little crazy. God has healed me. I am whole. Most people would never guess that these are some of the things that I've been through. But this is important because my gifting as a scribe was born and nurtured in these dark, dark places of my life. And I wrote this one particular poem. I think by this time I was 12, 13. And this is the actual poem I wrote. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, what is happening? But this was one of the times when my mom was, I guess, going through one of her worst mental situations. And I had an assignment, to do at school. And I had made my way to the school bus stop, gotten to class. And one of the creative writing assignments that we had was to write about something personal. And while I'm sitting there, this poem just came to me. I can remember my teachers sometimes, probably because I looked so neglected and unkept and all beat up looking when I went to school. I'm sure they were like, well, Theresa, what's going on? I remember them asking, and I'm like, everything's fine. I didn't really have the words to explain what was happening in my life. So I remember she was like, I want you to write a poem about something really personal in your life, and that's your homework assignment. There was a lot more to it, but I wrote this poem and it's entitled, I Can See My Soul. Mama is gone now. Another woman lives inside her now. And when I'm with her, time entangles the past and present. I see no tomorrow. In my mind, I hear pleading in Mama's once strong, sweet voice. I feel the wrinkles time has etched in the softness of her clammy, light brown skin. I embrace a brief rush of love pouring from her outstretched arms, and I cry for her from deep, deep, deep within my heart. Mama is gone now. Another woman lives inside her now. She's cold and frightening. And whenever I think of her, I become like a child locked inside a dark, dark closet. And I swear I can see my soul. So that poem marks the beginning of a very, very difficult time in my life in which I started expressing myself. And I started to pull out of me things that I couldn't clearly articulate that captured how I felt. Of course, I would come to the Lord. I would come to know the Lord later in life. But until that moment happened, this is what I had, and this is how I navigated. And strangely enough, this poem ended up winning a state award for writing it for my school. It was a state level award, though, that I didn't even know I had entered the contest. My teacher took it upon herself to enter this poem into this contest. Why am I saying that? Because That was the moment I realized I carried something of value. A school contest showed me that I might have a gift, because before that point, all I was doing was trying to deal. I was just trying to cope. I knew I loved poetry because of my elementary school teacher. I knew I loved school because I had access to the library and I could hear my teacher read poetry. I could go and hear my creative writing teachers do things. And then we got to have writing exercises in class. I was in heaven when I was in school. Plus I was eating, and then on top of that, listen, I find out that one of my poems have won a contest. These little things were like kisses from God when I look back at it, knowing that this is where I was having this major turning point in my life. Major turning point. And I realized that there was hope for me and that I had a gift. I remember my school being so proud of me. I remember my teacher being so proud of me. I remember students finally noticing me. I remember all of those things because I had largely been invisible up to that point. I mean, literally. I had been invisible up to that point in so many areas of my life, but there was no celebration for me at home. There was no celebration there. So this learning environment became a catalyst. And I want to share another poem with you because it was also written around this same time. And I wrote this poem. This was deliberate. And I sat down one day and I'm like, I wish someone would see me. And this poem just came out of me. It was like a bubbling up. But again, I didn't know the Lord. I didn't understand what was happening in my life. But here I am. And the poem is entitled Theresa the Invisible. I am an invisible girl sitting in an invisible chair. People walk by me, never noticing that I am there. They can't hear my invisible screams as I rise or see my invisible stand. And when I reach for an embrace, they slip through my invisible hands. Can someone tell me what's wrong with me? Why are these people just passing by? Does my invisible tears upset them when they hear my silent cry? I am tortured in my existence. I'd be better off if I wasn't here at all. If I was chopped down right now like a tree in a forest, would they hear or see my invisible fall? That was how I saw myself. And while I couldn't articulate it in a normal conversation, I could write a poem about it that captured absolutely every emotion and every ounce of emotion that I had. And listen, this is the other thing. I think I mentioned to you all that I would often copy poems of other writers. And it became such a habit that I kept that habit going well into my young adulthood. And copying the poems of other people over and over again is really how I learned poetic style and how I began to adapt to different types of poetic techniques. It's also the beginning place that I decided what I want to do is become a writer. I don't know if I would ever have had that dream be activated had I not had that encounter with that first poem. And had I not started reading the books of other for people my age, young adult fiction and those teenage books that was about writers and different things that characters had. I don't think I ever would have tapped into that. So I just thank God because I can see the hand of the Lord in so many places in my life, even though I had no childhood, even though tragedy was on every side of me. Um, I did find that there were things that I needed to say and release later on in life that would probably not be things other people would be interested in, but there were things I needed to say to help me move and process through life. When I finally made my way into the presence of the Lord, let me tell you, my whole life changed. I was about 28 years old, about to turn 29. I think I was maybe 5 months shy of my 29th birthday when I came to know the Lord. One day I'll share that testimony with you, but it was a dramatic occurrence, and it came at one of the lowest points in my life because I battled I ended up in foster care, I'll tell you that, and then ended up in a group home. I spent the all of my teenage years pretty much in the foster care system. And the thing about it is that in that place, I know people say that's sad, but for me, that was the absolute best thing that could have happened. That was the first time that I could sleep at night and not worry about what I was going to eat or who was going to take care of me, where I was going to be. I didn't have to worry about my mom and taking care of her. And, it was just, it was like, even though it was tragic in that sense, it was a burden lifted. I had a chance. And it was in that particular group home that some of the house parents began to say, Theresa, you're so smart. You have a future. You don't have to turn out like so many other foster children. Look, there's hope for you. They began to talk to me about things like college and university and things like that I'd never considered. Nobody in my family had ever gone to college. And it's by a miracle that myself and my other siblings actually finished high school because neither one of my parents did. My mother ended up getting a GED later in life. But for the most part, we I am an anomaly in my situation at that time of life that I was in. So when I came to the Lord, I began to learn some things that I can't even explain. My first experience in the prophetic was being awakened in the middle of the night, unction to write, just words coming out of me uncontrollably. It terrified me, but that's what I did, that and I had help. I had a little guidance along the way, but I'm skipping most of that story because what I want to get through right now is to let you know this. I was in therapy all the time. I had been hospitalized for my own mental problems. I couldn't touch my emotions. I was hardened. So it was hard. I don't think it's very difficult for me to cry even now, but it's not for the same reason. So it doesn't mean I'm not healed. It just means that my emotions develop differently. And even though I'm a very emotional and feeling person, they don't show in my emotions in that sense of the word. I don't easily cry. For years it was easier for me to show anger and show rage. And you can understand the psychological aspects of that. I was depressed and on medication for it. I was just showing signs of the same mental illness that my mother had. I was in therapy all the time. And I was lost, hopeless, very suicidal. Nothing could help. Had suicidal attempts, and which is why I ended up hospitalized. Had no self-worth, no value. I suffered from cutting. I spent years cutting. And this is something people don't know, except those closest to me. I didn't get healed from that until about 7 or 8 years ago because it was a subconscious type of cutting. And I didn't even know I was doing it until I would catch myself and redirect. Yes, I've been through healing. Yes, I've done everything you can imagine to try to overcome it, but it didn't come and it didn't break until a miraculous encounter I had about 7 years ago with the mentor that I have today. So the first level of my prophetic encounter was the purging of my own soul. This is so important because some of us who are going through, especially if you're having struggles in your mind, you're having struggles in your health, you're going through domestic violence situations, you're going through sexual abuse, you're having hard times. Sometimes we feel as if God is not with us, even though we are saved and even though we feel his presence. I learned that the first level of prophetic release in my life was not prophetic writing, as in I'm writing a prophetic word, but the prophetic unction to purge my own soul. So if you are a writer and you're always writing about your emotions, you're already, and a lot of people separate journaling from the prophetic. I don't, because I understand that a very simple principle about the spirit as a prophetic writer. And Holy Spirit does this. If Holy Spirit is activated in us and he has the freedom to move and to do what he was ordained to do in us from the before the foundations of the world, then any darkness in you, he's going to push out. He's going to reveal it because his first work is to convict us of sin on the inside of us. His first work is to direct us into the presence of the Lord. And that can't happen if the things that keep you bound are not brought up. So the first few years of my salvation, the Lord would have me journal my pain and journal my hurt, and I would pour it out and I would share things and memories and situations and circumstances that were too much for me to speak, too much for me to say out loud. And I would do it in detail. And sometimes I would destroy those journals. I'd burn them up, but I needed to get that stuff out, especially when there is severe abuse in your background, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. If there's words spoken into you, listen, there I was, 30 something years old, and I'm still hearing my mother's torment and her voice in my head. I'm still waking up in the middle of the night thinking I'm still there, back in that place 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Post traumatic stress disorder is real when you've been in trauma, and God wants to heal that, and he can heal that. And listen, I learned through this process that he sees us and moves in us prophetically, even in all of that pain as writers. So my prophetic release was the ability to tap into my emotions through the weight of my pen, because my pen was heavy. And what do I mean by that? When I touched my pen, I could feel the presence of the Lord come upon me. And I could just write, God, this is what's happening. I'm trying to process this situation that happened to me when I was 13 years old. God, I'm trying to process this. I've never told anyone this, God, but I need to tell you. And this is what helped me too. I would go to therapy sometimes, and my therapist would say, listen, what's been going on? And I couldn't utter the words because I'd lost my voice. I couldn't speak it. So I would hand her my notebook and I would say, can you read that? And that's how it started. And then with enough therapy and enough help, the story went like this. She said, can you read it to me? And I began to read it to her. And God used that back and forth to cause me to be able to regain and restore my voice, while at the same time being filled with the word of God, being healed, being loved on through the congregation that God had made me a part of. My pen gave me the courage to speak. It moved the prophetic writer in me from darkness to light. It moved me from hiding to truth. It moved me from secrets to openness. It was the washing through writing. It was the washing through writing prayers, the washing through processing things I was learning about the Lord. I was being washed through my ink. All prophetic writing isn't God said. Sometimes it's the impression of what God is doing. Oh my goodness. God makes room for everything concerning us. And I've been through all kinds of abuses in my life. And I look back now and I'm like, God, who was that woman? Who was she? I don't even know her now. Praise God. And I know some of you are there. But when I go back, because I kept my writings, I just want to say this. In some religious circles, people tell you, get rid of all that old stuff you wrote. I was able to save a lot of my old writings, and I am so glad that I did because I can see the work that God has done. He made room for my old writings. In fact, my first poetry book that I ever wrote, it was a compilation of all of the poetry that dealt with the darkness in me before salvation. And then the second part of my book was the light. That might be an idea for some of you who are walking right now from that place of darkness to light. It might be something those of you who are already in the light might look at as it relates to where you are and where you're going. Oh my goodness. I know that I am grateful and I am thankful for my journey. Oh, I am so thankful. Only God could bring us into these new places. Listen, on Good Friday, back in 2002, 2002, I believe. I think that's right. It could have been 2003. But I want to tell you about this one particular incident that had me release the weight of my pen. And I'm sharing it with you because we're coming to a close and I want to bring you into the light of sharing my testimony because sometimes people think that folks just, hear God and I didn't always hear God clearly and clearly concerning the word, but I heard him, and I want you to hear this. I heard him clearly concerning the condition of my soul because the things I was writing was evidence of his purging, evidence of his releasing my soul from its weight and its bondage. So that was very, very, very important to me. But on Good Friday, back in 2002, I was at an open mic, which I had begun to frequent those after I started receiving poetry in the middle of the night and hearing the Lord speak to me and song and in short stories. So I started hanging out with this evangelistic group in the community. They were doing street evangelism and they would work with the homeless youth and those youth that were in trouble. And a lot of their events would start at like 10 o'clock at night and go into 2 a.m. in the morning. But this one particular night, it was Good Friday, and they were doing a lot of hip hop, a lot of rap, the way that we do, just all Christian, but they were just doing that. And I was a part of that scene and I was becoming very close to that group. And it was an outlet for me. I felt like I could share my writing with them. This particular night, the pastor of that group, and we were in a rinky-dink little basement where, just basement, little toe up basement. I'm saying toe up. That's what we say in the South. But I mean an abandoned building. It was really an abandoned building and full of crates and a lot of things needed to be fixed up. There was still plastic flying off the walls, so it was a lot going on. But we were down there and we were dancing and we were learning about the Lord. This pastor was a rapper. And so everything he did was a rap, but he was always ministering to the young people. He was giving them food and counsel and guidance and telling them about Jesus. Then he put this really cheap mirror up, a full length mirror. You can get them for like $3 or $4 at any store here in my city anyway, and he propped it up on some boxes, and then he instructed all of us to stand in a straight line and face the mirror. So there we are in a single file line, lots of us, over 40, 50 kids and young people and young adults, because I'm in the young adult side at this point. But there we were, and we're standing there, and he began to tell the story of the resurrection, of the crucifixion and the resurrection. And he was standing on a stage, a little stage, above the mirror. And he's saying, as you walk up here, I want you to remember Jesus. And I want you to remember the resurrection. I want you to understand that you are why he died. So he had all of us stand in front of that mirror, one at a time. And he said, this is what he said. Oh my goodness. He said, when you stand there, you must look in the mirror and face yourself and say, this is why he died. And then he said, you need to make it personal. I am the reason you died and you were resurrected. When he started doing that, children, young adults were falling out in the spirit. They couldn't say the words. Some were going into deep groans and deep wailings and deep screams. You could hear and you could feel the spirit of deliverance and healing in that place. When it got to me, I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I'm standing there and I could not utter the words. All I felt was shame. All I felt was this overwhelming unworthiness. All the thoughts that I had about myself, you're nothing. You are a piece of crap. Nobody cares about you. I mean, every ugly thing I'd ever said about myself began to come into me. And they were like, we're not moving this line. You're holding everybody up. You must declare that you are the reason why he died. I was overwhelmed by the presence of the Spirit. I looked to my left, I looked to my right, and they were praying for me. There were people going into the spirit, and some of us were falling out. We fall out, they make us get right back up and get in the face of that mirror. And I remember shouting, oh my God, I remember shouting, I am why you died, Jesus. I am why you were resurrected. I went to a new level of understanding my worth that night. And out of the ash of that, I could not stop crying for days. But that particular night, I stood there and I said those words. I don't think I got home to maybe 1:30 or 2 that morning, still slain in the spirit. I don't even remember driving home. But I got there and I laid down on my bed, weeping. My husband was like, are you okay? I was like, I'm fine. By this time, I'm married. And I'm weeping. And so I didn't have my heavenly language that long. I had just gotten it. And all I could do was just pray in my heavenly language. While I'm praying in my heavenly language, I began to hear a poem. And this is what I'm going to close with this evening as you're listening to me. It's called, I Know My Name is Theresa. I know my name is Theresa. But Theresa once meant hate. And it rose with me in the morning time, and it rested in my heart when the sun set. It caught my reflection in the rearview mirror as I abruptly turned away, unable to bear who I saw, unable to bear what I saw. So I cursed myself, and I cursed the 4-year-old reflection of myself who called me mommy. I know my name is Theresa, but Theresa once meant bitterness. And it lived inside my mouth and inside my mind, waiting for deliverance that never came, waiting for stolen moments in time that seemed like love from anyone, but would never be. Moments that formed into dreams and visions that played over and over again in my head as I sat in front of the television for hours, pushing buttons on the game control, battling witches and warlocks, slaying dragons in a game quandary that only a game junkie like myself could understand. Barely separating dream from reality, barely living as I push the buttons, fighting everything, as I push the buttons, controlling everything, as I push the buttons, fighting everyone, and I won in my mind. You see, I know my name is Theresa. But Theresa once meant anger, burning rubber tire anger on a gasoline soaked pit that spit couldn't quench, pure water couldn't extinguish, anger that rolled from the very pit of my belly, thick, crimson. Anger that showed no mercy, just like Mama showed no mercy when she refused to touch me, to hold me. Anger that showed no mercy, just like Daddy showed no mercy when he pretended not to be on the other end of the phone line when I called, and he accidentally picked up, discovering it was me. Anger that showed no mercy when tears fell from my daughter's cheek and all I saw was weakness, and I told her she had to be tough and I was gonna teach her how to be. I know my name is Theresa. But Theresa once meant rage, and it shook and rattled the cage that I'd locked myself behind, just like the dark, dirty closet I was bolted behind as a child when I couldn't smile and I couldn't cry and I couldn't die and I was too weak to try, and I sat in front of the television for hours until my thumbs went numb from pushing buttons on the game control, and my tongue cried out for Seagrams and Tropicana and Easy J and Coke, and I rocked myself in the twilight, seeking escape from myself, seeking freedom from within myself, seeking escape from myself. I was a time bomb waiting for an opportunity. You see, I know my name is Theresa. But Theresa once meant unforgiveness because I hated so many. I thought this world owed me plenty. I blamed so many when the person I really couldn't forgive was myself. So I wished for death. I didn't know why I couldn't cry. I didn't know why I couldn't feel. I didn't know why nothing in this life seemed real except the hate, the bitterness, the anger, the rage, the unforgiving. Oh, but I'm here to tell you today that I know my name is Theresa. But because of Jesus Christ, because of Jesus Christ, today, Theresa means love. Welcome home, prophetic scribes. I pray today that you feel like you are home. I pray that you feel as if you are not alone. I pray that you know that there are others who understand your journey. I pray that you know that I understand. I pray that you know that we are connected by this calling. I know that you may not feel as if you're listening, that people know who you are or what this gift means to you. But I want to assure you that God knows, because he is the one that put this gift inside you, because it is him. He put it in me long before I knew him, and he used it as a catalyst to get me through. He pulled out the aspect of prophetic writing from the prophetic scribe, and he said, this is your portion. And it means something to God, even if it doesn't seem to mean anything to those around you. I pray that you are encouraged in your brokenness. I pray that you don't give up in the midst of the journey. I pray that you allow your pen to get heavy, and for the oil of the Spirit to pour from it like it never has before in the course of your life. I pray that you are free to write. I pray that you are free to feel in your writing. I pray that you are free to explain everything that you could not tell or that you cannot speak, because God sees and he hears it anyway in your broken heart. And I just declare the Matthew 13:52 scribal anointing upon you, that you be filled with Holy Spirit, that every area in your heart he has access to. Because if he can heal me from the level of darkness that I have walked in my life, he can heal anyone. Again, welcome home, prophetic scribes. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Chamber of the Scribe podcast. And by the way, download some of the poems that I shared with you today and this podcast transcript that I've made available. All the info is in my show notes. Be encouraged in Jesus' name.
Thank you for listening to the Chamber of the Scribe podcast. If you were revived by today's message, connect with Theresa Harvard Johnson at chamberofthescribe.net to be a part of her global Scribal community, or learn more through blogs, courses, virtual and in-person events.